Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in about a minute or two. We just wanted to give a chance for people to log on and get everything all set. We're happy you're here with us today, and we'll get going here in just a minute or so. All right. And we have a couple more people joining us, but just to let you know, we're happy you're here, and we'll get started here in about a minute. All right. We're going to have a pretty decent sized group today. So happy to have you. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. If you run into any technical difficulties, just let us know in the chat and I can help you out with that shortly. All right. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Samantha Hooker. I'll be the moderator for today's Eval Cafe. The Cafe is a longstanding speaker series hosted by the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Our goal with the series is to encourage a deeper dive into all things evaluation. When I am done telling you, the cool beginning stuff, I will go ahead and put some links in the chat. You can view our remaining Eval Cafe for this semester, and there will also be a link to join our mailing list, so you can stay up to date once we release next year's. Before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the history of the land we're on. Western Michigan University is located on the ancestral lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, which was historically occupied by the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, and we honor their stewardship and connection to the land. Today, we're excited to be joined by our very own Brad Watts, Assistant Director of the Evaluation Center. As I mentioned, we do have a larger group today. So for questions, if you want to go ahead and enter them in the chat, Brad will have a question and answer section towards the end of his presentation. I'll keep an eye on that to make sure we can address as many as possible. You can also use the reaction button to raise your hand, and that will also mark it for us that you do have a question. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Brad.
All right. Thank you so much, Samantha. I'm really thrilled to be here and excited that there's so many people who are interested in my topic today, which is to share a little bit about the revision of the program evaluation standards. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so please, Sam, let me know if this is for some reason not coming through. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, I know that there's quite a few folks joining us. I know you maybe all have sort of different levels of knowledge and interest with the standards. So I'm going to start out just a little bit talking about what is the Joint Committee on Standards for Educational Evaluation, or the JCSEE, as we abbreviate it to, and what our purpose is. I'm going to talk about program evaluation standards and give a couple definitions of how the committee sort of defines and understands that. I'll talk a little bit about the history of the program evaluation standards and sort of how that leads us to where we are today and why we've made the decision to undertake this revision process, because quite honestly, it's a lot of work. It's not something that we undertake lightly. And I'll share with you the revision process, the types of revisions that we've been making, give you a little bit of a preview of how things might be changing. And then finally, at the very end, and I think this is the most important part for the committee, and maybe it's the most important part for you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ways that you can get involved in reviewing the new 4th edition that we're working on of the program evaluation standards, how you can give us feedback and help us really make this a better set of standards and a better document for everyone in the evaluation field. So if I start getting too boring, please set your alarm clock for about 30, 35 minutes from now at the end of this presentation. So you at least tune in from this, because we really want to get some of you on board to help us out. And I think it's an important process. And it's also your really opportunity as a bunch of folks who, whether you teach, whether you're a professional evaluator, whether you work for an agency that uses evaluation, whoever you are, maybe you're even just a student of evaluation who's sort of joining the field. We want all your feedback and all your perspectives on these standards. So what is the JCSEE? Well, we have been for quite some time considered the official source for evaluation standards just in the United States and Canada. Other regions have their own sets of standards in Europe and Africa, in the Australian and sort of oceanic regions. Each of them has their own sets of standards, but these are the standards that are designated as official and supported by most of the organizations in the United States and Canada. So our charge is to regularly review, update, and develop standards as they are needed by the field, and to work on promoting them and disseminating them, with the idea that standards lead to better evaluations, to higher evaluation quality. And so right now, today, of course, today I'm going to be talking about the program evaluation standards, but we actually endorse 3 sets of standards at this time. In addition to the program evaluation standards, we have a set of standards devoted exclusively to personnel evaluation, primarily in educational settings, and then also classroom assessment standards for the K-12 educational setting. So these, again, are very targeted standards that are used in the classroom. And if you're interested in any of those, please check them out. Personnel evaluation standards is available from your favorite bookseller. The classroom assessment standards is available only right at this time through the Amazon Kindle service. But the nice thing about that is it's a small publication, and it's quite low cost by going that route. So I think it's normally in the $9.99 kind of price range. So if that's something you're interested in or need, please go check those out. In terms of who we are, so there's currently 11 sponsoring organizations that are official dues-paying members of the committee, and we have 12 members. So there's one representative from each of these organizations. We also have what we call at-large members, and these are folks who have specific expertise in standards development, or have a history with program standards, evaluation standards, and have been invited to be a member of the committee to kind of share that expertise through our review and development processes. This is also my opportunity to provide a little bit of a plug out there. We are always looking for new sponsoring organizations that has an interest in program evaluation or educational evaluation. So if you are a representative of an organization such as this, please feel free to, I'll share my email address at the end if you're interested in contacting me and learning more about membership. There's small dues associated with being a sponsoring organization, as well as, more importantly, the requirement to appoint a member who will serve on the committee and will work with us on all our duties of reviewing and developing standards. But it's a great way for these organizations to, again, have their voices heard and to influence how evaluation quality is defined. All right, so first off, standards. I'm going to start with a couple of just definitions to sort of make sure we're on the same page with what standards mean and sort of how the committee views standards in terms of the realm of our work. So 2 key points. These are actually taken directly from the 3rd edition, where it's discussed in there, how we define standards and how that might actually be different from how others define standards. But it's just sort of important to understand, I guess, our worldview on what standards mean and why they're important. So first off, and it is, I guess, the most direct point, which is that standards are statements that identify and define evaluation quality. Our goal is to decide what makes it for a good evaluation and to identify those areas, those dimensions of an evaluation that are really important and that should be included in a good evaluation. However, it's also very important to realize that we do not go so far as to define how to conduct an evaluation, how to achieve these benchmarks. So, for example, in the accuracy domain of the evaluation standards, we discuss things such as the importance of making good data selection choices or selecting proper and appropriate methodologies for what you're evaluating. But we certainly do not specify that certain methodologies are better than others, or that you should use a specific methodology in a specific instance. And that's ultimately because we expect that applying evaluation standards requires judgment on the part of the evaluators who are conducting evaluation. It's your job to ultimately take these standards, interpret them, and make really hard decisions about how to prioritize which evaluation standard is most maybe important in a given situation for your constituents, for those who hold an interest in the evaluation. And this is because, in fact, we recognize that there are standards that we know are important to evaluation quality, but that often exist in tension with other ones. So, for example, standards related to feasibility. What is feasible and what is required to, say, adhere to the highest levels of rigor or accuracy are not always compatible in a given evaluation. Resources are limited, time is limited. There are other practical concerns. So it's up to the evaluator to look at these standards, understand why these elements are important to quality, but then you have to make the hard decisions about what to prioritize. The second key point of these standards is, unlike some other sets of standards out there, these are not laws, these are not rules. These are what we call voluntary consensus statements. They have no regulatory status in the US or Canada, even though they are the official set of standards. And we consider them to be open in their use. So we like that and appreciate that if you use them, that you cite them if that's appropriate. Some evaluators in their proposals or on their websites or as sort of a matter of what they do, sometimes commit to their use or adhering to the standards or using them to define quality. But it's certainly not a requirement. It's also not a requirement that an evaluator follow all of these standards. You can certainly review them, make those decisions, and apply them as you need to make the best evaluation possible. All right, so what do we mean when we say evaluation? We are generally adherents to what I think of as the old Scriven definition of evaluation. It's the one I was taught, that evaluation is the systematic determination of merit, worth, or significance. And it's simply put, it's the process or product of making a judgment of the quality of a program. Second, okay, what's a program? Everyone maybe has ideas in their head. Sometimes they're kind of limiting ideas of what's considered a program and what's not a program. But for our purposes, we apply this as a very general, broad, and inclusive term. If you're a more academic evaluator, you may have heard the term evaluand. But for those who haven't, we're generally applying program to mean whatever is being evaluated. It's any sort of intervention or use of resources that's trying to accomplish something. The only thing that we're maybe more specifically excluding is, of course, personnel evaluation, which we have a whole other set of standards for, or product evaluation, which is kind of a different realm that the Joint Committee doesn't get into so much. But everything else, whether it's educational programs, social programs, governmental programs, programs and activities that are done in the business world and the nonprofit world, can all potentially fall under that banner of program. We consider these standards to be applicable to many, many different settings, conditions, domains. All right, a little bit about our recent history, and in fact, it's not so recent, and why we've decided to undertake this revision. So for those of you who don't know, the program evaluation standards in the Joint Committee go back 50 years now to 1975, when the committee was first formed. The idea came out of another task force that had been formed a year earlier, that was around the creation of standards for educational and psychological testing. So there were all these organizations that were involved in saying, okay, there's more educational programming going on. The idea of standardized testing was coming out and really growing. So they were making standards for the quality of those. And someone said, well, hey, there's a lot of other activity that's going on in education now, a lot of other interventions, a lot of programs to work with students to improve retention, to improve grades and graduation rates, and all these things that are really important. In the educational world, we should have a set of standards for how to evaluate those, because evaluation was slowly beginning to evolve into a real field, having come out of a lot of the first big programs and investments, some of the 1960s Great Society spending on education, at least in the United States. So 1975, this committee forms. There's 18 different groups all involved in them. And the first set of standards is published in 1981. And I always say that this is the first edition of the program evaluation standards. But that's not actually what it was called. It was called the Standards for Evaluations of Educational Programs, Projects, and Materials. And it was very educationally focused. But it did sort of set up the underlying concepts and structure of what would become the program evaluation standards. It established four primary, what we refer to as domains of evaluation quality, which are utility, feasibility, propriety, and accuracy. And started off with 30 standard statements, each defining a different area of evaluation quality within those domains. So fast forward about 13 years later, and of course, the world of evaluation has evolved quite a bit. here with the second edition, and it's interesting that they call it the second edition because it does have a different title. But it's considered the second edition. They changed the title to the Program Evaluation Standards. And in fact, in the introduction to this, they talk about how this is because they've noted there's a real change going on in the world of evaluation. There's an interest of evaluators in a lot of fields beyond school kinds of settings. Evaluation is starting to come up in public health and criminal justice and human services and all sorts of nonprofit programming that's going on. So they wanted to expand the standards to be inclusive of that. They do retain the same structure, so the same 4 domains, and the same, well, not the same, but the same number of standard statements. So 30 standard statements, the same 4 domains, but they actually change quite a bit. They swap some out, they combine some together, they add some new ones. They also heard feedback that as evaluation grew as a field, that more folks wanted examples of how to apply the standards in different settings. So this is where it sort of goes from a book describing standards to a book that also starts to talk about some of the details of how these standards can be applied in the real world of evaluation. So 16 years, we move ahead to what is the 3rd edition, and the edition that is still considered our current approved set of program evaluation standards. The name remains the same, but there is a huge change. A 5th domain was added. This is the accountability domain, with the idea of there needs to be sort of more look at the quality of the evaluations of these programs themselves. So the idea of meta evaluation comes up. How do we look at the quality of our process and our products that are coming out of evaluating these different programs? They also expanded the section on the scenarios. So there's case studies in this book that are much longer, they're more detailed, and there's more integration. So the examples aren't just necessarily narrowly limited to one standard, but you start to see it's a full case, and they talk about how different standards are applicable to those scenarios and help, paint a fuller picture of a real world kind of approach to how you think about doing quality evaluation. And of course, there's a lot of updates that go on related to language and technology. The difference between 1994 and 2010 in terms of technology is pretty huge. So you see a lot more, use of computers, use of online data and online systems, things like that. So they begin to integrate those into the standards as well. All right, so that leads us together about another 15 years into the future to where we are today. In 2021 through 2023, we were really exploring the revision of the standards. We're in that process now, and we have a general, fingers crossed, target date to get the 4th edition of these standards out, which is going to be 2026, which is next year. And I know for all of us who are working on this process, that's probably a scary date. But we really hope that with your help and feedback, that we can meet that in a timely manner. All right, so why revise the program evaluation standards? The committee spent a lot of time talking about this. The committee is required by our charter to review each set of standards every 5 years after its publication. So obviously, 2015 and 2020, we sort of made decisions to keep the standards as they are. However, really before that, we started thinking about, okay, we don't want to let these get too long in the tooth, as they say. We want to make sure that they're still relevant to the evaluation field. And these are some of the things we discussed. So one is that the evaluation field is really evolving a lot. It's expanded so much in the past 10, 15 years. The types of evaluations that are being done, uh, individuals who are entering the field of evaluation coming from many more backgrounds than they did back in the 80s and 90s when so many evaluators were kind of just coming out of the world of education or educational research. And they're conducting evaluations for new audiences too. Evaluations aren't just going to, the heads of government agencies or to principals or school boards in leadership in educational settings. They're going to again, leaders of nonprofit organizations, private businesses, community-based organizations, different audiences that really have different needs in terms of the information they get out of an evaluation and how it's presented. Of course, we always have the evolution of language going on. There's new terms that come out. Sometimes there's old terms that grow to be seen as outdated or just their use sort of drops off. There is also, based on feedback that we received, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but sometimes the earlier editions were fairly academic in their language. The original parties, the original authors of the first, second, and really even the third edition tended to come from university backgrounds. You had more individuals who were maybe taught evaluation or were evaluation theorists. And so we noted that, okay, language is evolving. We really need to make sure that this is plain language and that it's understandable across different fields and outside of an academic setting. Of course, technology keeps changing. A huge one is AI. Really didn't exist in 2010, at least not as anyone was actively using for the most part in the world of evaluation. Now it's common. There's huge issues about what's ethical to do with AI. How can it be used? How can it be cited? That we're starting to try to take into consideration, as well as changes in storage, security, new privacy rules that come out. So technical things that we have to mention in a different way than the third edition that talks about securely storing your disk and tapes or locking your file cabinet that's full of surveys. Feedback on usability. Again, with the changing audience and the changing evaluation field, we've received feedback to say, hey, these books before, they're kind of academic, they're kind of long, they're kind of in a college textbook format. We want to make sure that the next edition of program evaluation standards is really accessible to everyone in the field. It's an easy to use reference. That it's not something that you just use when you take that grad class on evaluation and then you sort of put on your shelf. And then finally, we also want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of growth in the development of other best practices documents, such as the AA's statements on evaluator competencies, cultural competency, policy statements. We want to acknowledge those and reflect those as best we can. All right, here we start to get to the interesting stuff. The revision process. So how are we doing this? And it is a daunting task. But first, let's step back a little bit and talk about sort of how we got into the revision process in the first place, because really there's a lot that happened before the committee voted to revise and authors started actually tearing things apart. Going back to 2018 and 2019, There were already some sort of thoughts going on that, well, in 2020, we may or we may not actually vote to undertake a revision. But before we get there, we should start collecting some information, some initial feedback from the field to try to learn about, how are the standards being used? How are they seen by evaluators in the field? What are areas we might need to change? So 2018, I did a panel on evaluation standards in general at the European Evaluation Society meeting to kind of learn a little bit more and hear a little bit more about how um, other parts of the world are doing their evaluation standards. We also did a couple of sessions at the AEA conference, the American Evaluation Association conference in 2019, as well as a session at the Canadian Evaluation Society conference. These were sort of roundtable style events to talk a little bit about the standards, but mainly to collect information and feedback from those in attendance about how they used or didn't use the standards and what could be improved. So all of this leads this then up to 2020. The program evaluation standards were up for review. We didn't at that time quite jump in with both feet to begin the revision process, but instead decided to start a task group to explore revision and explore ways to collect more information, more feedback on both if and how to do a revision. And I will say that I think part of this was also coming from the fact that 2020 was right in the middle of COVID. We were all concerned a little bit about undertaking a huge revision process during sort of an unknown time when we weren't really getting together in person in the same way. We weren't necessarily going to conferences. It was going to be tough to do some of the duties of this, but our alternative was to initiate a special issue of the Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation, be focused on the standards, would help us learn a little bit about kind of what's going on out in the world in terms of research on evaluation standards use. This was published in 2022. Had quite a few different articles showing how the standards are used in different settings and domains. So they, on the one hand, it showed nicely how the standards are still very important. On the other hand, I actually worked on a systematic review article that kind of showed how, gee, there's been real declines in awareness of and use of the program evaluation standards over the preceding years. So like anything else, over time, without the standards being revised, they maybe fall off the radar a little bit. So we discussed in depth, okay, how do we, based on these findings, sort of bring it back and make sure that if we're going to continue these standards and improve them, that we do it in a way that really broadens their use. In 2022, then again on the dissemination side and sharing side of things, did a conference panel to talk about these findings and again try to get some feedback. And all of this led up to, in 2023, we made an official vote to revise the program evaluation standards and begin that process. And since then have continued to try to share that this process is going on, to build awareness of the standards, their importance, and the fact that there's going to be this new 4th edition coming out. We did a presentation at AEA in 2024. Of course, I'm doing this presentation today here in 2025. So what's the process look like? Well, there's a lot of details to this process, and there's a lot of sort of nitty-gritty back and forth in any big group authorship. So this is maybe the 10,000-foot view of what we've been going through. So in December of 1993, the committee voted to establish an 8-person task force that's going to be responsible for creating the first draft. of a new set of standards. We also discussed and made a few sort of broad guiding decisions about how those standards would look. So one major topic was the domains. So we made the decision to retain the 5 original domains from the 3rd edition, and to sort of use that as a organizing structure for then the revision authorship process. We assigned a lead author who's responsible for shepherding through the process of revisions for each domain section, along with 1 to 3 co-authors who are focused on that specific area. During then the spring of 2024, the few months after that, each group sort of worked on these on their own. They had to work through their section, identify potential areas or themes for revision. And then we met in March 2024 to get into sort of a hands-on work through of, what are the core concepts of the prior standards? Do we want to keep them? And to then set an outline and format for what the new standards are going to look like. This continued on through 2024. We had 3 more meetings. One in May, I believe that was in person. November was in person at our annual meeting. January was virtual. And in there was also sort of asynchronous review by all authors of all sections. So essentially we'd go in iterations, creating revisions within our domain authorship groups. We would expand this out to allow the authors from different groups to, of course, all weigh in on each other's work, and then sort of come back together as a group and directly go through and work on editing and revising and making important decisions about things such as combining or eliminating or adding standards. This then brings us up to where we are today. We're working on the kind of final stages of the 2025 official first draft. There's still some last changes to be made, and then we'll go through final editing for readability, language, accessibility. And our target is to have later this spring what we call the official first draft. And this will be the first one that sees light of day outside of the committee, and the one that then we will be seeking a much larger review and feedback process on. All right, so I can't really walk you through all the different changes that we've made because some of them are minute, and there's many of them. Some of them are very large, but they're maybe not ready to fully share. But I want to lead you through just kind of examples of the main types of changes that we're making. I also put this note up here to remind myself to tell everyone that, hey, anything you see beyond here, this is draft stuff. This is not everything that's changing. It's not ready for citation or release. But I'm just showing it to kind of give you an example of how we're altering the standards. So the most common thing that's going on are simple changes to the language or just how something is described. But where we think that the existing standard and the core concept behind it is good, it's important, and there's no larger reason to actually change it. We just want to make sure that it is appropriately described. So, the example here was the upper box on the left was the first propriety standard in the 3rd edition about responsive and inclusive orientation, saying evaluation should be responsive to stakeholders in their communities. So a couple of things there. One is, responsive and inclusive orientation. What does that mean? Is that sort of action oriented enough? Is it actually focused in on what an evaluation needs to do to be responsive to feedback. Another is a shift away from stakeholders. There's been some, as we look at the literature, we see that there's been discussion in the field that maybe there's other terminology that fits better, that's more appropriate. So this is one where, again, the core concept is retained, but now an initial draft is looking like this is going to read constituent engagement, about how evaluations embody the perspectives and values of all constituents. Again, shifts in language and things that we'll want your feedback on to tell us, is this clear? Is this better? Is this an improvement? And does it still capture that original and important concept? The next type of change, there's occasional additions and removals of standard statements. This doesn't necessarily happen that often, but it does occasionally happen. So for example, information security. This is something that wasn't touched in such a direct way in any prior versions, but the committee felt is an emerging and important thing for evaluators to consider. In terms of removal, this almost never happens. I think it's only a couple of times. The example here is resource use from feasibility. And it's not that the committee has decided that the use of resources is not important and is not a dimension of quality and something that evaluators really need to consider. But we noted that it had really already been covered in another standard. In this case, it was the 7th propriety standard. And so a decision was made to avoid that duplication, to remove the standard under feasibility, because we felt it fit better in another place and was already covered there. A more common one that you will see is sometimes merging of standards. So in the first example, again, these are both under feasibility. We saw two standards. It's like, well, there's a lot of overlap there. We felt that they really sort of go together and could kind of fall under one standard statement. So, for example, project management, practical procedures were merged into a combined standard statement. A second situation which sometimes arises is that you have a standard where we feel like its concept is already integrated or can be better integrated into an existing standard. So in this case, timely and appropriate communication and reporting, which talks about the reasons for that. And one of them being that it's about, consequences and influences. So here's one where the draft idea in this first go round is to combine the concept. We sort of retain the title of the original Utility 7 standard and remove the old U8, but try to retain everything that was important about that standard within an existing standard. And last is a total reconceptualization. This is a somewhat rare one as well, and you really see it in the accountability section. So for example, meta evaluation. There's two standards on meta evaluation that were in the 3rd edition accuracy domain. After much review and debate, it was decided that the idea of assessing the quality of one's own evaluation work is certainly very important. However, formal meta evaluation is something that's just not always very, very practical or realistic for most practicing evaluators. In some ways, it's more of an academic ideal, right? So how do we sort of reconceptualize this to capture the important idea of assessing one's own evaluative work, assessing evaluations, but without specifying as a standard a process that's maybe overly burdensome and unrealistic to do. All right, so to summarize, we kept the 5 domains of utility, feasibility, propriety, accuracy, and accountability. And it looks like we're landing on essentially the same number of standard statements. So it goes only from 30 to 31. So a small change in net gain there. But if you look within each area, you'll see that there's actually quite a few shifts back and forth that are the result of this revision process. So for example, in the utility domain, we go from 8 standards statements in the old 3rd edition to looking at 6 in the new one, primarily because of combinations of standard statements that are going on. Feasibility domain remains the same, but that's because of one combination reducing the number and then the addition of a new evaluability standard there. Propriety, same thing. There's quite a few standard statements that are gained here. This is an area where there have been a lot of changes in the field, right? The importance of transparency, the accessibility of evaluations by all constituents, information security, which we mentioned as being a technical thing that's kind of changed. So growth in the number of standard statements there from 7 to 9. Same in accuracy, we added information selection standard. And accountability, finally, we retain the same number of standards, but there's quite a reconceptualization that goes on. So many different underlying changes, even though superficially, when you look at the new list when it comes out, it will look pretty similar in size and number to the old 3rd edition. All right, I think I'm staying right on time. So now the important stuff. You can wake back up and learn about how to get involved in reviewing the program evaluation standards. So my obligatory help wanted sign here. We're going to want a lot of help, and there's going to be a lot of different opportunities for feedback. We're going to be asking for reviewers. We're going to be asking for field testers. We're going to be holding what we call national public hearings in the future, which are just going to be broad open forums for public comment. The committee is also going to be in the process of recruiting a validation panel, which is a small kind of selected expert panel who really knows a lot about or has prior history with the creation of evaluation standards to help us validate this. And then I like to acknowledge that we were formerly an ANSI national standard. We no longer use them for review, primarily as an issue of cost, but we generally retain the same process and felt that was important to sort of our own, quality assurance. The first 2 of these are the ones that I'm hoping to recruit some of you for today. These are going to be starting soon. So field testers. The idea of field testers is for individuals who are practicing evaluators or have some evaluation experience, have access to either their own or colleagues' evaluation work, to actually sort of take this new draft 4th edition of standards and apply some of the standards and see how they work and if they fit or if they don't fit, if it's too much or something's missing, and give us feedback on that. Give us feedback on how do these standards work when you really try to apply it to an actual evaluation that was done in the real world. You don't necessarily need any specific background or knowledge in the standards. You don't have to be familiar with the 3rd edition. You can take in the 4th edition as new, or maybe if you have knowledge of the old ones, that's fine too. But just to be able to kind of put fresh eyes on them, apply them, and give us some feedback. The other type of review is more what we would call a paper review or desk review, where we're going to ask you to kind of sit down, to take a critical eye, to read through the entire set of standards and the details and explanations that go with them, and give us some good feedback and comments on those. And for these, I think it is very helpful to have at least some prior knowledge of the third edition or maybe other evaluation standards in general, just so you have the background and perspective on how standards are made and different standards that are out there. What you'll be asked to do is we will give you a copy of the fourth edition. We'll try to provide some details on how much time it might take. We'll give a set of criteria that we'll ask you to use to review those. It'll be an online form that we'll request you to enter information into. And there'll be a hopefully reasonable deadline, but probably a pretty firm deadline for completing this and getting it back to us, because there's going to be a lot of these, and we really need to stay disciplined and keep ourselves on schedule to hopefully publish these standards in 2026. And we will ask those who serve as field testers or reviewers to generally refrain from publicly sharing or, of course, citing the draft program of evaluation standards fourth edition prior to the official release. If nothing else, just for the fact that we expect your feedback will make us change the standards. And my last little plug is to say, if you're on the fence about this or aren't sure if you're qualified, my inclination is to say yes, because we are really looking for a wide range of different backgrounds. Whatever your field is, if you're a student just starting out or someone who's just getting in evaluation, or if you have done evaluation professionally for the past 35 years, we need both perspectives. We need to make sure that the standards work for novices as well as experts in the field. We need to make sure they work in every different environment. In terms of geographic region, of course, these standards are generally focused on Canada and the United States. It doesn't mean we won't welcome perspectives from those working in a different international context, but we definitely want a lot of participants from Canada and US, since that's where these really need to apply. And then, of course, I mentioned the other future opportunities for involvement. If you can't do one of these, there will be some public national hearings. If you're an expert, if you're a former author of any set of standards, feel free to reach out on the website or to email me directly, and we'll see if you might be a good fit for the validation panel. All right, so if you are interested, please point your phone at the screen. This QR code should take you to a brief Qualtrics form, or you can type in this tiny URL and sign up. And just signing up doesn't doesn't obligate you. It puts you on the list. In a couple of months later this spring, when things are ready, we'll be sending out more information about what the process is going to look like, how long it takes, and you can make a final decision then. But please consider it, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there have come in. I haven't looked at the chat, Samantha, so.
It's all right. I kept track of it for you. I'm going to preemptively apologize. Zoom is pretty good about cutting out background noise, but I don't know if it's jackhammer proof, so don't mind if, I have a little bit of feedback over here. Okay, so Brad, first question is, will other existing standards that American or Canadian evaluators are required to use, such as the OMB standards, be used to inform changes, or is the Joint Committee relying on the individuals who opt to participate in the review process to raise any issues?
I think we're primarily relying on individuals in the process to raise those issues. It doesn't mean we are reviewing other relevant documents, both academic literature on standards and on practices, as well as the documents themselves, at least from sort of those core documents. But I don't know if we've thought as much about the OMB standards, but that's not as much my area, but I'm sure I know at least one other person on the committee who I'm sure has those on their mind. Um, and so they get integrated probably one way or another.
Okay, thank you. And is there any way to check if someone is already on your list of volunteers that they can check, or would you rather they just sign up again?
I'd say just go ahead and sign up. I mean, if there's duplicates in our list, we'll just, we'll drop those out to try to keep you from getting two emails.
I was gonna say you're probably pretty good at cleaning data, I would guess.
Yeah.
Okay, how will input from reviewers actually be used or adjudicated?
Hmm. That is a good question. In terms of, I mean, we will have we will have a group who's reading every single one of these and compiling them and then bringing them together to our next probably big in-person meeting, which I think is this summer. And then kind of hashing through it. So in terms of, can I guarantee that a comment will or a suggestion will direct something to happen? I can't. I mean, it's going to be based on, right, ironing out a lot of things that potentially have conflict with one another, um, and figuring out how to resolve those, or if there's, a clear cut push in one direction or the other. But there will be sort of a systematic review process, right, where someone's going to sit down with these, take the comments, code them into themes and ideas. We're going to present them to our task force, um, and then we're going to have to hash it out. I can't say that there's a more formal process than that.
Okay, thank you. And our last question, and I think you already covered this, but just to kind of recap, who can participate in the review process? Are there any prerequisites? Do you recommend them just reaching out if they're interested and you can kind of go from there?
So if you go into the form that's linked on the screen, you'll see it'll ask for contact information, but it also asks a few sort of experience types of questions. So about like, how long is your experience in the field, and sort of like what's your educational level and what's your field. Um, we don't necessarily have criteria that would exclude someone from being a reviewer. Um, but what you respond to that might sort of put you into one group or the other. So again, if you want to be a field tester, for example, um, you don't necessarily need to have a lot of expertise, but you do probably need to have some sort of access to real world evaluation types of materials. So if you're a practicing evaluator, it's probably an easy one for you. If you're a student without much background, it might also be a great one too. As long as you're beginning to maybe work a little bit in the evaluation field, or you at least have some colleagues or mentors or a teacher, who could kind of provide or share something like that for you to use. Um, but no real restrictions on field or experience level. Like we'll try to fit you into something one way or another.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Um, we are almost at our time here, but Goldie did just add a great question to the chat. What type of information do you most hope to receive from reviews?
For myself, maybe Goldie, I should kick that question back to you too. For myself, I think I want to hear constructive, critical feedback, and even getting into some details, especially for those who do kind of a paper review, because we're doing some very kind of detailed and in some cases minute changes. So changes to language, to wording. Um, and even though that stuff seems small, I think it really is important to hear from the field of saying like, okay, you've rewritten this and it's not clear to me or I don't understand it. Like, I really want to hear that to make sure that then, okay, we got to pick some different language, some different wording to make sure that everyone clearly understands what this standard means. So yeah, just critical eye, um, actually love details, believe it or not. And then on the flip side, for field testers and real world review, um, if you come across something where you say like, gosh, I can't imagine ever being able to meet this standard or ever being able to use this standard in the real world, um, say that. Tell us that so that we know and we can reconsider. Okay, is this standard maybe is it presented wrong? Is it a standard that we shouldn't have because it's not usable by evaluators in the field? So that again, that sort of like critical feedback, I think is really, really helpful.
Okay, thank you so much, Brad. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for our last spring eval cafe. That's going to be on April 9th, featuring Sarah Mason from the University of Mississippi. She'll be giving a presentation called You're an Evaluator, Research on Explaining Evaluators to Non-Evaluators. So excited to hear that. I did add the link to register for that presentation in the chat, and I hope that all of you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you.